college freshmen, all Negroes, were refused service at a Greensboro, North Carolina lunch counter, and the civil rights sit-in was born.
Television was not effective by itself in any respect. There was no investigative journalism along the lines of 60 Minutes in the 60s. It took the movement to dramatize events and force television to cover it. It was a conscious act on the part of the movement to reach out to television and to try to communicate via mass media. I doubt that television could even have covered segregation and made it dramatically unless there was somebody disagreeing with segregation.
For a number of years, the Negro passengers on the city bus lines of Montgomery have been humiliated, intimidated, and faced threats on this bus line. Just the other day, one of the fine citizens of our community, Mrs. Rosa Parks, was arrested because she refused to give up her seat for a white passenger.
You know, if black folk were happy sitting in the back of the bus, that was not news. It was only news when black folks said, I'm not going to sit in the back of the bus anymore. And if white people had let them sit in the front of the bus, that wouldn't have been news either. It was white people throwing them off the bus and provoking the confrontation. And implied in that was always the threat of violence. Implied, but never made. It was only this nonviolent movement, led by a group of preachers, and really responded to by a mass media and by a coalition of conscience amongst the majority group in America that made possible an avoidance of violence.
CBS presents 4 Hour Times. Images and Conscience, Part 1, An Examination. The first of a 4-part series of broadcasts looking back on the role television played in the civil rights movement of the 60s. The formal development of the civil rights movement almost parallels the growth of television in this country. 30 years have passed since the Montgomery bus boycott thrust Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. into the nation's spotlight. 1985 also marks 20 short years since television's coverage of the consciousness-raising historic Selma to Montgomery March. This march influenced the passage of the far-reaching national voters' rights legislation. 3 men distinctly qualified to discuss the role television played in the civil rights movement are the Reverend John Hurst Adams, Bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Church and longtime civil rights leader; Mr. William Leonard, a former reporter, CBS executive, now retired, and former president of CBS News; and the Honorable Walter Fauntleroy, congressman from the District of Columbia, former aide to Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference coordinator of the Selma to Montgomery March of 1965.
Well, I like to think that television came of age with the civil rights movement of the 60s and really made the First Amendment come alive. I think the Founding Fathers would have been proud of the fact that they were wise enough to realize that there would be times when the body politic might not respond to the legitimate concerns of citizens through the political process, the voting process, and that therefore they had to guarantee the right of any citizen to peacefully assemble and petition. And Dr. King, those of us who participated in the movement, were successful through the medium, through television, in doing 2 things. One, raising the consciousness of the American people to a serious problem in the country, and secondly, pricking their conscience about it. Television in the 60s, I think, did that.
Well, of course, I think television as a means of communication is so dramatic. Just yesterday, for example, a photograph of Desmond Tutu going through a screaming mob to save a man's life, demonstrating not only the force of the man's personality, but also the magnificence of the media, in that the whole world saw that the same day. I think the same thing happened with Martin King and I Have the Dream speech, the incidents of dramatic confrontation between oppressed peoples and their oppressor just put the level of consciousness of the American public so much higher, because television brought it into their living rooms. They didn't have to read. They didn't have to go look for it. With the evening news and dinner came the education of a people.
Isn't it curious that those of us who were doing that for television, that is, those of us in the news business and the documentary side of television, and those of us who were involved in religious broadcasts too, I think although we were conscious that the civil rights story, for instance, was of enormous importance, and that we should cover it, and that we should do it, and that it was something in which we must be present, I think we were so busy doing it, so busy being there, so busy trying to get at the story, that we were quite unsophisticated, and it was only later that we said we were part of a consciousness-raising process. I suppose that's the naivete of journalism, that they do first and think a little bit later. But you're quite right. That was one of the, and perhaps the most important of the four great movements of the post-war world. And I think that thanks to television, it was one of the two that was brought most forcefully to the American people. There were a couple of others that, because they were not so dramatic and were not so photographable, perhaps, were not as forcefully brought home. One is the conservative movement, and the other is the women's movement. There weren't those big clashes. There weren't, so perhaps they weren't as well covered. The Vietnam War conflicts, the anti-Vietnam War movement, of course, was, but it was the civil rights movement where television and television news, as you said, really was there.
The Honorable Andrew Young, now mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, was the former executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and aide to Dr. King. We talked to him in his office in Atlanta.
Most television journalists came into the movement quite naive. But after cameramen started getting beat up, and after the reporters started getting pushed around, they began to, first of all, identify with us because they were being treated like we were being treated. It was dangerous being a newsman, and particularly a television reporter in those days, because you could twist the print. No matter what was going on, you could write it in such a way that it wasn't particularly offensive. But the television camera didn't lie, and you saw for yourself what was going on, and people internalized the evil of the system of segregation as a result of witnessing it on their own television screens. I think part of our turning to television was an awareness that black Americans were beaten up and killed all the time. And it was never an issue because nobody was forced to face it. It's an issue if you're killed on television. And in our orientation, we said that this was the risk, that this is what we decided, that we were not going to be killed in secret, and we were not going to be slaughtered at night for no purpose. We were going to define the cause for which we would live or die. And if it meant that we would die for this cause, then we would die as conscious individuals, choosing to live or die by what we believed in, not by chance circumstances that life thrust upon us. And so it was a deliberate taking on the threat of death, I think, that made it newsworthy.
In 1962, we were in a place called Albany, Georgia, and we encountered a police chief by the name of Pritchett.
Chief, what instructions have you given your men concerning the handling of Negro demonstrations, particularly?
We have schooled our men here, and I think the result speaks for itself, that they have done an outstanding job in the handling of these situations. We knew that their theory was nonviolence, so we based our theory on nonviolence also, and I think this is what has stunned them, that they were expecting police brutality, they were expecting the police to come in on them, which has not happened.
And he said, now, gentlemen and ladies, you must understand that you are violating the law, and I am a law enforcement officer. So if you violate the law, I must take you to the station. And he would say, gentlemen, pick them up, treat them right, and they'd take them in. After about 3 weeks, we said, nothing's happening here. We said, we've got to find ourselves a fool. And somebody said, over in Birmingham, there's a fellow named Bull Carter. Now, he is a fool. Now, he will beat you with fire hoses, turn dogs on you in front of cameras. They will take them to 200 million people. I said, that's the fellow we want. So that television did. I mean, that would not have been possible without that medium that went not just to the theaters, as many of us would live each week to get to see the newsreels of what was happening
in the older days.
Yes. But it went to everybody's home. And that's why I said it came of age during that period.
I think television really came into its own with the sit-ins, because in the sit-ins, here was a deliberate act conducted on television and designed to inform the American people and to create a picture. With the sit-ins and the freedom rides, there were activities that television could cover. In Birmingham, for instance, the day-by-day demonstrations were designed to demonstrate the immorality and the inconsistency of segregation. We would march into a lunch counter, and we always let the press and the police know where we were going and what we were doing. The nonviolent movement operated in a Gandhian principle of full disclosure. We were not doing anything in secret. Indeed, it was Gandhi's notion that you wanted to raise the problem to the court of world opinion. And television helped you do that. So you would go in and you would not go directly to the lunch counter. You would go to another counter and purchase something. And then you would turn and go to the lunch counter. And people would see that you could purchase something here, but you couldn't purchase something there. Why was your money no good at a food counter when it was good at a counter where you were buying pencils and papers and books or clothing? And so that was a deliberate demonstration of the moral inconsistency of segregation. In Selma, we were struggling to get the right to vote. I think also the march from Selma to Montgomery occurred on the very Sunday that the movie Judgment at Nuremberg was showing as a Sunday afternoon movie. And so here was an audience locked in to all of the horrors of the Holocaust. Suddenly, an interruption about Selma. And you see American state troopers and Alabama state troopers and a sheriff's posse in a southern U.S. county riding roughshod over people, beating them. You see them being tear gassed. And the comparison was very, very clear that these were not American tactics. These were Nazi tactics. And America could not continue to allow this to be a part of our body politic. It wasn't long after that that we had a march calling on people of goodwill from what Dr. King used to call the coalition of conscience or the coalition of goodwill. And when we said that here the police will not protect us, we asked our friends to come to march with us. And then Archbishop Yakovus of the Greek Orthodox Church, Rabbi Abram Heschel of the Conservative Rabbis of America, Catholic nuns and sisters joined in the marches, along with Protestant clergy, black and white. And there was in the front line of a demonstration the existence of a coalition of conscience that even if the Johnson administration didn't respect us as black Americans, it had to respect that integrated multicultural phalanx of moral leaders in our society. And so it wasn't long after that before Lyndon Johnson made his "We Shall Overcome" speech. And again, that would have only been possible through television.
Well, I don't suppose every cause is worthy of television, and every cause does not occupy television. And journalistic judgment is one of the things that journalism is all about. The important question is when are you used, how much are you used, and that's a very important question. But it's a question that is just as applicable to the White House as it is to the civil rights movement.
Absolutely.
It's just as applicable to any politician who, you'll pardon me, Mr. Congressman, who naturally wants his story, his constituents' story, to get across, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it's up to the journalist to put that story in perspective for his constituency, which is his audience, and if indeed it is worth telling, also to tell the story behind the story, and that is that the story of how he is being used, if he is indeed being used. That's an important part of the story, just as it's important to tell the story of a campaign. What is that campaign setting out to do? How is that politician trying to win your vote? He's trying to use you, he's trying to get your vote. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of the story, that's part of the journalistic job.
One of the things you have to remember that all during the civil rights movement, as Martin and his followers were in Birmingham and Selma, in 150 or 250 other cities and towns, at a much smaller scale, the same kinds of projects were being done, being covered by local news, where people's neighbors were on television getting arrested, or people's neighbor was on television making a speech. I think the fundamental power of the civil rights movement contributed, which made its cause work on television, was its commitment to nonviolence. And the fact that it was the recipient of violence. They took the beatings without striking back. And the whole Gandhi King concept of creative nonviolence made the civil rights movement retain the moral initiative.
Well, I think you make an extraordinarily good point, Bishop. You know, in terms of raising the consciousness, what that did was to show the innate humanity of a group of Americans who, in the mind of many, many millions of Americans, were zero. They were not either human nor not human. They were just something out there. They were, in those days, Negroes. And black is a term not yet 20 years old. And when they appeared, nonviolently, taking it on the chin, suffering, acting like people, willing to act courageously, and other people reacted as people do when they see people suffering.
Well, I can't help remarking on your first point you made, namely that the thing that made it attractive was the fact that a conditioning that had gone on in the white psyche was being challenged. That is, for example, blacks were considered, they'll rob you, they'll murder you, they're violent. And all of a sudden, here are people, as you said, who come across as being human and having, standing for nonviolence. And then secondly, the thing that was so beautiful about Martin was that he was a preacher, a PhD, from Boston, you know what I mean, and in his demeanor, in his speech, clear, lucid, and people got another view of, you know, this is not what we have been told in our separate schools and in our driving through these neighborhoods, that they are like that. They are violent, they're ignorant, they're dirty, they don't want anything more. All of that consciousness was raised as a result of what television did in that period.
The Atlanta restaurant owner, under court order to comply with the civil rights law, opened up on schedule today, but he admitted no Negroes. A large crowd gathered at Lester Maddox's Pickrick restaurant to see if he would be tested. He was. 3 Negroes showed up at the Pickrick, but were not allowed in. Instead, Maddox accused them of trying to put him and his Negro employees out of a job.
You're not going to ever eat here now. You want to close my business?
What did the court say, Mr. Maddox?
I think you're not going to ever eat here now. Do you want to close the business? Is that what you want to do?
What do you want to do?
You can't eat here.
The government gave you a decision. What do you want to do?
I'm not going to integrate. You're going to buy by the post.
Well, that's the funny thing about television. I think that George Wallace standing in the schoolhouse door and Bull Connor's violence helped us. We made our most dramatic gains during the time that we were seen as the underdog, and people in power were, persecuting us. But in that situation, Lester Maddox came off as the underdog. See, the law had been changed, and he was perceived as a small restaurateur being put upon by black people in the federal government. And some of us tried to stop people from bothering Lester Maddox. But I think that the demonstration against Lester Maddox made Lester Maddox the governor of Georgia. So, television, if overdone, backfires on you. And that's clearly a case where it backfired on us. Just as it backfired on Jim Clark and on Bull Connor, when they overplayed their hands on us as the underdog, when they abused their power, and that was seen on television. But once the law was changed, Lester Maddox became the underdog. Maybe that's something of a kind of inherent morality that's present in television that's very hard to manipulate, because people respond to television not just because of the picture, but because of what the picture says to them about justice or injustice. And however they perceive injustice, that's what they're repelled by. It's not that they like black people or dislike black people, or that they like white people or dislike white people. It's that the American people inherently are in a quest for justice and freedom. And when they see justice and freedom being denied, they affirm freedom and they affirm justice. And television helps you do that.
They were polite, nice. Butter wouldn't melt. I could see how surprised the secretary was that I was the Mr. Clark who had their appointment.
Religious television traditionally has always been involved in the area of consciousness raising. As a youth minister and staff member of the National Council of Churches in the early 60s, Mayor Young had frequent advisory responsibilities with the 2 CBS religious broadcast series, Lamp Unto My Feet and Look Up and Live.
Well, at that time, that was the only network television that was doing any programming involving blacks as people. Blacks were shining shoes or doing tap dances on most programs. There was an Amos and Andy level of television in the late 50s, and it was only on Look Up and Live that blacks got to do things that they now do easily, played the part of judges, doctors or policemen, and it was integrated television, and I knew that was a contribution to changing the consciousness of America. If there had been no television, and if the isolated incidents of black and white confrontation had occurred without anybody knowing about it or being forced to respond to it, it would probably have slowly escalated to the point where we would look just about like southern Lebanon. I'd probably be dead and not mayor, because after the Second World War, people were not going to go all over the world fighting for freedom and come back home and not have freedom themselves. So I think a certain confrontation with racism was inevitable. Television made that confrontation a productive one, and it made it possible to act out a social drama in a few minutes rather than in a few months or years.
I think that the progress toward equal rights and the attainment of civil rights for American citizens would have been slowed down drastically without this dramatic medium taking it directly into people's homes for them to see and to find it difficult to avoid dealing with the issues in the civil rights movement.
But one of my frustrations in trying to bridge this 20-year gap for those who did not experience it is the need to make a present generation, those who did not experience it, aware of the need to continue the struggle. I think it was Goethe who said that what we have inherited from our fathers, we must earn again for ourselves, else we will lose it. And we have developed a pretty solid black underclass that needs more and more the help of those who made it. Who made it? Why? Because some people got beat over the head and were knocked down with fire hoses to open up opportunities for them to move through to an education, to get a basic educational opportunity grant or a guaranteed student loan, or to be able to go to that college and to get an affirmative action program. When you haven't experienced that 20 years ago, are here looking back on it and don't see the tie, then there is no fire to use what I have. Now I am a lawyer, and I am a doctor, I am a manager, and I must not forget those who are left behind. And if you don't have that linkage drawn and some understanding of what made possible where I am today, you may not be willing to make the kind of sacrifices today that will make it better for those who are deeper in poverty today, quite frankly, than they were 20 years ago.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
In the weeks ahead, For Our Times will be rebroadcasting in its Images and Conscience series 3 examples of CBS religious broadcasts of the 1960s, designed to help make us aware of how those times shaped our times.
When all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
CBS presents For Our Times. Images and Conscience, Part 3, Sounds of Courage. Here is the Honorable Andrew Young, Mayor of Atlanta.
Today is Part 3 of the CBS religious broadcast series looking back on the role of television in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Sounds of Courage is a story of people of faith, people who sang their way through danger, people who laughed and who joked, who told stories of their loves and their fears, and who dramatized in their own actions and in their own lives a struggle for social change in song and in story that helps us to understand something of the spirit of the 1960s and how people were able to face hatred with love and violence with nonviolence. Sounds of Courage.
In the basement playroom of Randolph Blackwell's home in Atlanta, Georgia, some people are having a party. Not an ordinary party, but the kind they often have. Some of them are Negroes, some are white, some of them are leaders, some are students. They have one common bond, their dedication to the movement for civil rights in all parts of the country. CBS News has been invited to attend and to bring in its cameras. The only sounds you will hear in the next half hour are those spoken and sung in that basement one evening in early May of this year. The sounds of courage.
See, we went through a whole history of the movement phase. From the time, go ahead and strum it.
Yeah.
All right. From the time that we started way back down in Auburn.
Yeah.
In fact, this is where that song came from. When they put an injunction on the movement in Albany, and the people were kind of stifled for a while, but they decided they wasn't going to let no injunction turn them around.
Oh, yeah.
But then it came on up, and the folks in Gadsden remember when Al Lingo tried to turn you around. All right. I think the worst meeting anybody ever had in the movement was one night in Gadsden. Now, folks saw the bridge on television. No, they saw the bridge on television, but they caught them on the courthouse square late at night in an all-night vigil, and the state troopers waded in and just beat heads. And that little brother over there was standing up there, and they got a cattle prod to him. And they stuck the cattle prod to him, and he didn't move. And they stuck it to him again, and he didn't move again. And so the state trooper stuck it to himself, thought it wasn't working, and he shot it up. Living tail. But then they caught my little brother. They got mean. Then they stuck it in his temple, and it knocked him out. Yeah. But he stood there, and ain't many men can stand up to a cattle prod. No. I mean, it takes a good man. But then you come on down. You come on down to Bull Con, and the police dogs, and the fire hoses, and long days in the cold jail where they turn the heat on in the summertime, and sometimes down in Albany they turn the air conditioning on you in the wintertime. But then you come on down a little further. Come on down into Savannah. That's right. In the summertime they turn the heat on. And they packed 60 and 70 folks in a cell that wasn't any bigger than 15 or 20. But it didn't turn anybody around. They kept on going. But you bring it on down a little further, see? And bring it on down to Selma when Al Lingo got his troops together again. He thought he was going to beat some folks into submission again. But all he did was beat us into the greatest march that the movement has ever seen. Yeah. And Jim Clark, he can punch folks. He can hit folks. And you'd think that these people would learn. You'd think that they'd learn that beating and cussing and jail doesn't turn folks around.
No.
But they still think that they can beat a Negro down and keep him from wanting to be free. But it seems like, I don't know what it is, but when they beat 50 folks in Marion, 400 showed up the next night. And when they beat the 600 on the bridge, it was 6,000 by the time we got back to that bridge.
Yes.
And when they tried to give us a little hell on the way down the road, by the time we got to Montgomery, it was 50,000.
Yeah.
So the folks ought to know that ain't no beating, ain't no cussing, ain't no jailhouse, no kind of abuse, no kind of suffering gonna turn us around.
You know why I learned?
Why is that?
Why was a donkey bone? Why was a donkey bone? Mommy, why was a donkey bone? Mommy, why was a donkey bone? Somebody had to pick the cotton. Somebody had to put the corn. Somebody had to build a great nation. And that's why the donkey was born. That's why the donkey was born. Why was the donkey born? Mommy, why was the donkey born? Somebody had to beat the drum. Somebody had to blow the horn. Somebody had to sing the blues. That's why the donkey was born. That's why the donkey was born. Mommy, why was the donkey born? Somebody had to cry at midnight. Somebody had to weep and moan. Somebody had to love everybody. That's why the donkey was born. That's why the donkey was born. In Alabama. That's why the donkey was born. In Mississippi. That's why the donkey was born. Way down in Georgia. That's why the donkey was born. All over the nation now. That's why the donkey was born. To fight for freedom. That's why the donkey was born. His Lord. That's why the donkey was born. My Lordy. That's why the donkey was born. Now we got another great freedom fighter here. Who came all the way from Nashville down through the Freedom Rise. All right. And then he went from the Freedom Rise into Mississippi. And then he ended up really going into Selma and starting out the Selma movement. And I'm sure he's got a story to tell in song. Bernard?
Well, one thing I found when I went to Selma was pretty dead community. We talked about the Uncle Tom and that sort of thing. That was one of the reasons why our field secretary scratched some off the map. Well, they said that they had too many informants. Yes. Well, I have a theory about Uncle Tom's. That is that that Uncle Tom is a person who no doubt has tried to make some effort to do something for the people. Well. And has come to the conclusion that there's really nothing he can do to help the people. Yes. So he then decides that he will help himself. Mm-hmm. In many cases, I went to people who I knew were Uncle Tom and secretly disclosed the plans for the next day, showing confidence in them. Mm-hmm. And somehow, there is a goodness in man, there is a conscience. Men have to deal with that. And it wasn't so comfortable for this man to have to go back and tell. In many cases, they didn't. And I think that one thing in the nonviolent movement finds in terms of creativity is that many people may stand in the same positions, but may find more meaning in their role to play. So the job of Uncle Tom is to take the message to the white people. And I think it's good that he has that relationship with white people, that he can go and talk to them. Because now in Selma, Alabama, the Uncle Tom still has the same rapport with the white people, but only he's bringing the messages back to the movement now. So we don't need to convert the Uncle Tom to marchers. We only need to convert their role to a creative and active role, a positive role. And we get many tip-offs what's happening and that sort of thing. As many people well know, from the so-called good Negroes, you see, in Selma, Alabama. God bless them. We're down in Jackson, Mississippi. Remember after the bus got burned, Birmingham and Jackson, etc. Then after the Montgomery riots and this sort of thing, there were two busloads left Montgomery and went down to Jackson, Mississippi. The first busloads that went into Jackson. There were only about 20 of us, about 10 on each truck. And the jailer said that a whole day passed and no other bus showed up. Nobody had, had announced that another bus was coming. And the jailer said, now you see, you made yourself out of a lot of food, sitting up here in jail, and you think, oh, ain't nobody coming down here to see about you, and just trick yourself. So you ought to know when it's enough. So you thought you had enough in Montgomery. They went on trying to brainwash us and that sort of thing. And we were sitting there in our cells, looking at each other and that sort of thing, not knowing what's going to happen. Anybody who's been in jail know what that means, you know, how you cut off from communication, you know what other people are doing. And it's sort of an uncomfortable feeling in a sense. You have to have a lot of faith. And so we told the jailer, you know, he didn't know what he was talking about, but, you know, we weren't too sure when we said, you know, a lot of people are going to be coming, you know, that sort of thing. He said, well, yeah, you didn't trick yourself. You made a big fool like yourself. Okay? And you're trapped down here by yourself. So he said, we're going to take you and put you in parchment and we're going to forget about you. Lock so we'll keep. So, along about noon the next day, we were eating some beans, you know, red beans they serve in jail and that. And we heard the sirens going, paddy wagons. So we knew right away that the Freedom Riders were coming in. Because those sirens started heading down to the bus station. We could look out over our windows, you know, and see the buses coming. We started singing a song. We looked at the old jailer. He was a sort of puny fella. And he was sort of weak, and he needed some reinforcement for the kind of people who were coming. And he started to sing the song, Buses Are Coming. He started looking at the jailer and saying, gotta get you ready, oh yeah. Gotta get you ready, oh yeah. Gotta get you ready, gotta get you ready, gotta get you ready, oh yeah. Buses are coming, oh yeah. Buses are coming, oh yeah. Buses are coming, buses are coming, buses are coming, oh yeah. into Jackson, oh yeah. They're coming into Jackson, oh yeah. They're coming into Jackson, coming into Jackson, coming into Jackson, oh yeah. I'd like to stop and say this. I think one of the things that really caused the movement to go is the ability of other people to respond. When people get in trouble, somehow they realize that everybody's in trouble, and they bring their bodies on down in the trouble spot. I think the March on Washington and the March on Montgomery and the Freedom Ride, all these things sort of testify to the fact that when people get in trouble, there is something within people that can make them respond. They can feel responsible for what's happening. And another verse of this song, after we started singing, the jailer got real warm. He didn't like, the fact that people were coming and that our songs were true songs. And they weren't strange songs, you see, a strange land.
Here's your story.
They were very relevant because buses were coming. And so the jailer got mad. See, we didn't see the people because they carried them over to the city jail first. They hadn't come with us yet. So we were so happy and we started singing. The jailer said, you better shop all that so-and-so singing over here. We're not going to have that.
Tell me what he said.
Say, you don't want to tell it.
Make it plain. Make it plain. Make it plain. What the jailer say?
Say, you're not in the playhouse. Say, this is the workhouse.
All right.
Say, this is my jail. You're not going to take over this jail.
All right.
So, he said, so we said, we're not going to pay attention to this man. Because we free now, sure enough. All those folks coming from New York, Baltimore, California. So we said, so the jailer said, if you don't shut all that...
Tell me what the jailer...
All that senseless hollering.
What the jailer
said, I'm gonna take your mattress.
Make it plain now.
He said, you can take our mattress. Oh, yeah. You can take our mattress. Oh, yeah. You can take our mattress. You can take our mattress. You can take our mattress. Oh, yeah. We will keep our freedom. Oh, yeah. We will keep our freedom. Oh, yeah. We will keep our freedom. We will keep our freedom. We will keep our freedom. Oh, yeah. Then he came in and started saying, oh, I want the mattress. So we did him a favor. We piled them all up at the door. Some of us went outside the cell and dragged the mattress down. Want the mattress. Kept on singing. So the jailer said, well, he know how to get us. There were about 40 of us in one cell made to accommodate 8 people. And he said, if you don't stop singing, I'm going to take your toothbrush.
All right. All right.
Then we had to have a conference.
All right.
Somebody say, wait. Let's not make a hasty decision. Said we're going to have a strategy meeting. We had a strategy meeting, and the vote was not unanimous, it was a majority. And we said, you can have our toothbrush, oh yeah. You can have our toothbrush, oh yeah. You can have our toothbrush. You can have our toothbrush. You can have our toothbrush, oh yeah. We will keep our freedom, oh yeah. We will keep our freedom, oh yeah. We will keep our freedom. We will keep our freedom. We will keep our freedom, oh yeah.
You know, Bernard said, the jailer said to shut up all that senseless hollering, and it reminded me of Black Will's song. She said, talk. Senseless? Senseless. Oh, I thought it said senseless hollering. But anyway, but there are a lot of people, who think freedom songs are senseless hollering. And I really was remembering quite an interesting lecture that Blackwell gave the other day on what freedom songs were anyway.
You can do anything you want to, if you can overcome the fear of death.
Right.
And there aren't very many people in the country, or in the world for that matter, that have actually overcome the fear of death. And the unique quality of the freedom songs is the fact that they were written by people that were compelled to live with death because of the circumstances under which they lived. The slave couldn't send his friends and his relatives off to a funeral parlor because there was no funeral parlor. And it's natural that the slave would speak quite frankly of death, and it's a mistake for anybody to argue that the spirituals or the freedom songs are songs of escape. Because they aren't songs of escape, they are songs of tremendous courage, because they deal so fundamentally with the question of death. And if we ever overcome the fear of death, then we are free to do anything. The man that is, we often kid ourselves into believing that the millionaire is the free man. But this is fallacious, for he's got all sorts of fears tied up in it. The man that is free is the man that's not afraid to live because he's overcome the fear of death. And I can talk about it not only because of the background of the spirituals, but because of the fact that I had the very personal opportunity to wrestle with this question of fear. I sometimes wonder whether it's better to be shot or to be shot at and miss. All right. There's no way to ever completely articulate what it means to have a man open a machine gun on you and survive it. Bernard moved around to Mississippi. It was my unusual opportunity to be in a car where 4 gentlemen opened up a machine gun on my car, and I survived it. I love everybody. Open up, here 4 guys opened up a machine gun, and for the next 2 weeks, I couldn't operate a car because anytime a car pulled alongside of me, it just wrecked me, you know, having been through this experience. And Bernard, I personally wrestled with this business of overcoming the fear of death. There's one song in the movement that I think has particular significance. We don't sing it enough. And I don't know it well enough, but if Dorothy will help me, I'll try to sing it.
Oh, please do. Somebody will.
There's a song that goes, "Done made my vow to the Lord."
Yeah.
And I'll never turn back. I will go, I shall go to see what the end will be. Now, I can't guarantee how this is going to turn out.
That's all right.
Done made my vow to the Lord, and I never will turn back. Oh, I will go, I shall go, to see what the end will be. Done made my vow to the Lord.
add to, well, there's one other thing I think we need to put in here, right along this same line about, well, that we're following along here. And that is that we've been able to find friends when we needed them too, in terms of what Bernard was saying about being in jail and wondering whether anybody else was going to come. In a strange way, whenever we've needed friends, they've always shown up. Mm-hmm. But I think that...
Hurts, don't it, Mickey? Yeah.
But the thing is that what we've I guess what we've experienced here tonight is as we talk about black folks organized and as we talk about Negroes this and Negroes that, we never really forget the fact that this is not a struggle between black and white. That this is a struggle between good and evil. And the fact that almost every meeting we've had, from the very first sit-in, I remember in the very first sit-in, the first boy that got beat up in Nashville was a white boy, Wilson Yates, a Methodist student studying for the Methodist ministry. And right on down to the bridge, to the death of Reverend James Reeves, along with Jimmy Jackson and Mrs. Viola Liuzzo, that this has been a struggle of black and white together, the forces of goodwill in the nation seeking to overcome the forces of evil. And I think with this kind of alliance of the people of conscience in the nation and throughout the world, we shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome.